All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Niedermeyer, and I'm joining you from Washington, D.C. And I think we'll go ahead and get started for the day. So I'll just go through some housekeeping quickly. For those that haven't joined us before, as an FYI, all participants are automatically muted when you come into the Zoom session. But you're welcome to interact in a couple of different ways with the panelists and other attendees. You have a chat feature, a chat box that you're welcome to use to introduce yourself and share any interesting resources or thoughts. We do ask if you have questions for the presenters that you send those through the Q&A feature, the Q&A button. And then we can also type out answers to you, and then we'll have a nice record of those at the end. So thank you for using the Q&A for any questions. You're also welcome to change your view settings if you want to see the videos or not see the video feed from presenters. You're welcome to change those settings in your Zoom application. Otherwise, I have shared a link in the chat box to check out the biographies of your fellow conference attendees. So please feel free to check that out. And if you're having any technological issues, feel free to send me a message in the chat box. And do note that you can direct your message either to all panelists and attendees, or you can send it to individuals. So you could send me a private message as well. With that, I don't think there are any other updates, so I will hand it over to Chilombo to get us started. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alex, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second day of discussions on the governance of state and customary land. So for those of us who, those of you that were in the presentations yesterday, our conversations on large-scale land acquisitions, the extractive industries, and land dispute adjudication revealed quite a number of gaps in the governance of both state and customary land. We heard that some of these gaps arise due to, for example, corruption, weak institutional structures, political interference, and the lack of data on land transactions. And quite a number of recommendations were made to address these issues. Some of these recommendations were creating synergies between all institutional actors, improving data on land, engaging traditional leaders on good governance practices, developing policies that protect local communities in which these investments take place, empowering communities with information on their land rights. We also heard policy recommendations around improving the capacity of the Lands Tribunal and also fusing traditional land adjudication processes in the legal framework. And today we continue this conversation on the governance of state and customary land. And like yesterday, we have 4 presentations which will try to unpack some of the issues around the governance of state and customary land. The first presentation is from Kosiyo Mikositalewanika, who has worked for the Eastern and Southern African Management Institute for over 10 years, where he rose from the post of consultant to senior principal consultant. And at ISAMI, he headed the Management Sciences Division and the Information Technology Center for 10 years. He also worked as a director of the Diocese of Mongo Development Center and as a systems manager at Zambia Railways Corporation and computer operations and systems support superintendent at Zambia Airways Corporation. Kosiyo holds a Master of Science in Computer Science and a Bachelor's in Computer Science as well from Jackson State University in the US. Today's presentation, Kosiyo looks at the implication of traditional land administration on development planning. He focuses on the case of the Alui, that's the Lozi of Barota land in Western Province. Kosiyo, please go ahead with your presentation. Hi, Casio. If you're ready, you can go ahead with your presentation. If you have any issues around maybe your video or your mic, just let me know. But I see that you're able to turn. Okay, there we go. So you can go ahead, please.
Kusia, I think you may still be muted, unfortunately. So let's see if we can get you unmuted. So you should see a little microphone button if you can hit that. Oh, and you're good. You should be good now. Let's see.
The implication of traditional land administration on development planning, the case of Alui, losses of Barot's land, Western Province. Next slide. Background and purpose of the presentation. Over 90% of the land in Western Province is under the jurisdiction of the Barotsi Royal Establishment. Thus, development planning needs to consider the structure, systems, and procedures of traditional administration of land. What needs to be considered are the areas of traditional land administration, governance, and the judicial system which support the land administration. Next slide. Five land ownership types in Barot's land. Mubwangweshi, this land belongs to the Litunga as inherited by each Litunga who ascends to the throne. Mubwalu, principalities, certain indunas and members of the royal family have access to land, which is attached to their position within the Barotsi royal establishment. Mubwaba Nabamalena, members of the royal family hold this land in trust. Mubuwalusika, family land or inherited land, as it's sometimes called, it is held once granted and is heritable within a particular family. Mulalambula, this land is far from any human settlement which is allocated to anyone. Next slide, please. Traditional land administration and types of soil. The land administrations includes distribution of previously unallocated land, repossession of unutilized land, acquisition of land, jurisdiction of the land disputes, marking of boundaries, procedures for asking for land, procedures for distributing and allocating land. Types of soil within the land, Mazulu, anthills in the Barotsi floodplains, Lishando, soils which are almost perpetual wet, Litapa, mainly mudlooms, overlying sand, dry matongo, where fruit trees grow on account of the stable groundwater, wet matongo, where vegetables and pineapples can grow. Matema are created in forest with low soil fertilities and they contributed to deforestation. Next slide, please. Barotsi governance structure. The Litunga, who is the king, is the custodian of the land and natural resources, and is based in two twin capitals, Lialui and Limulunga. The institutions of royal tribes are part of the governance. Kings and queens continue to have special powers even after their death. There are different levels of governance structures in Barotsi land. Namuso, which is the mother of all governments within Barotsi land, Rwanda, which is governed by the Queen of the South. There are 7 regional principalities, 121 silalos. Silalos are counties. Then villages or homestands, households. Each level of government has a quota apart from the household. Each level of government in Barotseland officially communicates information to the people citizenly through the quotas. That is a quota, a court. Right. The main responsibility of the quota is to carry out political, administrative, and judicial functions of each tier of government. In addition, the quota is a multi-purpose public meeting place. Public works plans are announced, discussed, and agreed upon in the quotas. General announcements of public interest are also made in the quotas. Dignitaries visiting specific areas are expected to pay a courtesy score to the local, regional, or the national quota. Next slide, please. There are 4 classifications of Indunas. Nduna wa Mlena, Ndunas who are attached to the Litunga or to a chief in the palace are referred to as Likombwa. These are stewards. Nduna wa Kuta, these Ndunas are based in the Kuta or the royal capitals. Each Nduna has a sector or a ministry he or she is in charge of. Nduna wa Silalo, Silalo Ndunas are in charge of Silalos, the counties. A Silalo is a county and is further subdivided in smaller areas called Silalanda, a collection of homesteads. Nduna wa Munzi, these are village headmen. He is sometimes referred to as Mungamunzi, the owner of the homestand of the village. Royal grave officials, known as the Ngomboti, possess special powers which enable them to communicate with the deceased kings and queens. The judiciary system. Administration of the judiciary in Barotseland is done through the Kuta. The highest Kuta is Sikalu, which is the Supreme Court. The Ngambera one next to him in rank during his absence acts as the judge and submits judgments to the Litunga for approval. The rest of Indunas acts as assessors. An important member of the Skarukuta is Natamoyo, which means mother of life. Is the minister of justice and the mercy. Is a redeemer. Sa Ekuta in Namuso, headed by Inete. Most of the cases heard in the Sa come on appeal from Silalo Kutas. Principality Kutas handle cases within the principality. Next slide, please. Implication on development planning. Since the late 19th century, a complex network of canals has been developed in the Barotse Plain. A total of 3,000 kilometers of canals and waterway networks are recorded. Canals enhance the use of natural resources, enabling multiple uses and livelihood, which are critical for the economic of the local people and the Barotseland. Induna Mayuni is in charge of canal development and the management. Fish management. The upper Zambezi fisheries has in excess of 47 fish species, out of which 29 are said to be of significant commercial importance. Game management, one of the areas of success in regard to the royal establishment is the Lua Game Reserve in developed during the reign of King Lewanika, but officially recognized in 1946 as a reserve of the managed by the royal establishment. The status of this area remained such until 1972, when the government of Zambia took over and created it as a national park. Grassland management. The floodplains along the Zambezi have few trees and are occupied by huge expanse of grasslands. Next slide, please. Forest management. Forest bound the wetland of the Barossa land on upperlands. Managing crops production. The majority of households in Barossa land depend on subsistence farming for their livelihood. Fire management. Fire is an important integral part of everyday life of lodges ever since their existence. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. That ends my presentation.
All right. Thank you so much, Kusio. I think this is a very important topic because it highlights an issue that deserves a lot more attention than it currently elicits. And your presentation has carefully demonstrated a highly structured traditional land administration system. And a couple of questions arise from your presentation that we'll handle as we get to the Q&A sessions, but just immediately, the thought is, how has Barossa land been able to preserve this governance system structure for such a long time? And it's important to also understand if there's any sort of state and Barossa land interaction going on in Western Province. We'll get back to that discussion during the Q&A, but right now I want to move on to our next presenter, who is Barnabas Mwakale. Barnabas is a practicing town planner and a member of the Zambia Institute of Planners. His research areas of interest include land tenure, urban development, and urban planning practice and policy. Barnabas's presentation today relates very closely to Kusio, so he's exploring power relations and urban land use in a centralized traditional society, and he focuses on Mongo in Western Province. Barnabas, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chilombo. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Barnabas Mwakale, and this study was done in conjunction with Lynn I.C. Konje, who is a lecturer at the University of Zambia. Today we're looking at power relations in urban land use in a centralized traditional society of Mongo. I'll take you through an introduction, which will have the background, and then the aim of study, research objectives, as well as the brief methodology as well, and research results. Then I will conclude and give a few recommendations. Next slide, please. All right, so there has been a global shift in the management of land because of economic reasons. This has been moved from holding land in communal, on a communal basis, and moving it to a point where someone can individually hold land. This economic shift has had an impact on Africa as a whole, but most of the parts that have been affected are the eastern and southern parts of Africa. This impact of shifting based on the economic benefits has resulted in modification of rules of access to land in Africa, as well as in Zambia particularly. Zambia has had changes of, in terms of its land legislation. Yesterday, you did realize that one of the presenters touched on the 1975 Lands Act having been repealed and replaced by the 1995 Lands Act. But I must indicate here that the lands legislation in Zambia does recognize two tenure systems, land tenure systems, in the name of the statutory tenure and customary tenure. Both are legal, and the legal system does clarify on which power is supposed to have jurisdiction over customary tenure, for example, and over statutory tenure. Let's go next slide. Next slide, please. All right. So, although Zambia has laws that acknowledge the duality of tenure, these have clearly stated that customary tenure should be handled by the traditional leadership, traditional authorities, and the statutory tenure should be handled by the state agencies, such as the council, the Minister of Lands. All these doing handling land on the state part on behalf of the Commissioner of Lands, who is doing so on behalf of the Republican President. Despite this clear guidance that there should be a separation on the two types of land tenure and the jurisdiction and who manages them, there is an existing interplay. There are two systems that are currently visible in Mongo Town. And the Mongo Town, we mean the area which was identified as the urban area in the repealed law, the Town and Country Planning Act, which is the central business district. The study conducted to examine the impact of power relations on urban land use in a centralized traditional authority of Mongo. That was the aim of the study. The research objectives included the following. One, to examine the land tenure systems in Mongo. The second one was to establish the characteristics of the urban land use pattern in Mongo Town. And the third was to find out how power relations affect urban land use in Mongo Town. Next slide. So the study found that two types of land tenure system exist within what is formally known as state land in Mongo. Within the boundaries of what is known as state land, there are two types of land tenure. And for Mongo as a whole, there are also two types of land tenure, that is statutory and customary land tenure. And statutory tenure issues certificates of title as proof of ownership, whereas customary land tenure is in Mongo has 5 types of customary, has got 5 types of tenure, as alluded to by the precurrent speaker. And many thanks for bringing out that a lot of information on that. The customary or traditional authority issues land ownership certificates. This is very different when you compare with other traditional authorities across the country. This is very different, but notably very important. And the territorial establishment issues out a certificate of ownership to those that have been given land. So the study revealed that within what is formally called the state land, there are 2 types of land tenure, and these are statutory tenure and customary tenure. And figure 1 does show the land tenure systems in Mongo Town. Also, figures 2 and 3 show that there is actually even collection on what is formerly called state land. You may realize that different pieces of legislation do segregate these functions based on which type of land tenure is in place. So on government or state land, what is expected is that all markets should be governed by the councils. But here we have some markets and other corridors of commercial corridors governed by the traditional authority. Next slide. So in essence, the study found that there is no clear separation between the land tenure, in terms of land tenure between the two institutions, Mongo Municipal Council and the Barroso establishment, because there is an interplay on what is called state land. You still find some areas managed by the Barroso establishment. Yes. Right. The study also looked at the characteristics of the land use pattern in Mongo and compared the existing land use map with a number of land use models, including the multiple nuclei land use model. But of all those that were compared, Mongo showed that it was close to the concentric model by Burgess of 1926. And this shows that it should be expanding outwards, but it is limited. So the model is not fully applicable to Mongo because of the conflicts or the disagreements that are there in ownership of land. As you may see there on the northern part, there are those red dots, which indicate that is BRA controlled land. On the western side also, on the edge, you see BRA land that is within what is supposed to be the boundary of the statutory tenure. You see also inside and part of the south there that being run by the Barroso establishment. So basically, the study found that these two these two powers, the state and the traditional authority, do have are managing parts of the same land, which should not be the case according to the legislation. Let's move on. All right. The effects of power relations in urban land use in Mongo Town. I'll start by saying the characteristics of power that I know power has been defined in different ways by different people, but for this study, what is important to note is that power is a collective transaction that occurs between actors in a relational unit who jointly coordinate their actions towards a common object. And the two part of the many aspects of power is that one, it is ubiquitous and it is not limited to any particular institution or an individual. It can flow through anyone and through any institution, and that is a positive thing. But also, it can be used for achieving the good. And this is to say that it can be used not only to suppress others, but also to bring out development. So the study found that the BRA in the Mongo Municipal Council's relationship in its current form frustrates efforts of the council and the government-related ministries to effectively plan for the development of the town, as the BRA still extends the power to alienate land on what is formerly called state land. Now, you'll find that within what is called formal state land, you find people who have the certificates, land ownership certificates from the BRE. This means that the local authority has to engage the BRE for them to, if they are to effectively do development control in the area. That in itself has delays in implementing town planning, effective planning of the area. The engagements are good, but it does delay because when someone has got a land ownership certificate, then you know that you are dealing with the Litunga, because that is the CEO of land ownership certificate has the CEO of the Litunga. Therefore, as a matter of respect, you have to engage the issuing authority, and so before you even implement anything on the ground. And a number of people showed that they had these land ownership certificates. This relationship in its current form distorts the morphology of the town. The edges of the town should have been not the same. Some of the identified land use conflicts that are existing within the town currently are blocked accesses around 10%, and conflicting households and others. But of interest are the encroachments. This is because the traditional system of allocating land does not specify the coordinates or the points, the edges of the plot when it is issued. Well, it does by virtue of maybe using the measuring tape, but those are not marked, and you cannot find those points later if there is a disagreement between the two parties. In the event, where it concerns the allocation being in town, this means that part of the land that will be taken will have been allocated by the council. Therefore, that shows the disagreements. I must note that these disagreements are not public, or they are not very easy to find. They are not easily identified on the ground, because there is mutual respect for the BRA, and there is also respect for the council. However, this is where you find an introduction of three parties in the power relation. In this power relationship, you have you have the parochial establishment on one hand, you have the state on one hand, but you also have the people. And these people decide on who they will listen to, as long as it meets their demands. The demand that the people have, is land. And if you follow the acquisition of land from government side, it is expensive, it is lengthy, and it is very tedious. Some people have died before acquiring the title deeds. But when you look at the traditional system, it is easier and it is fast. So the people that want to acquire land in town would rather go by the system that allows them to acquire land cheaply and quickly. In which case, as it stands, those that have been allocated land there have even acquired the land ownership certificates that prove that they now own that piece of land. Also of interest is the fact that some of there are others who, when a piece of land has been declared statutory, it means that they now have to pay land rent to Ministry of Lands. But the situation is a few still refuse to pay to Ministry of Lands, as the study did reveal. Next slide.
All right, you have a minute to wrap up, Barnabas.
Thank you. So in conclusion, the customary land tenure systems show a high level of organization, because these have been with the BRE for a long time, for over 400 years, to say the least. The study also found that the land tenure conflicts exist in Mongo between the BRA and Mongo Municipal Council. The BRA extends its land alienation authority onto state land, and so this relationship between the BRA and Mongo Municipal Council does not play out well because it affects negatively the morphology of the town. And the recommendations that we have is that government should engage BRA. There should be a review of the land use maps. There should be public awareness and engage in planning agreements. Then there should be also inclusion of the BRA on the planning standing committee of the council. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barnabas, for that presentation. And like I said, your presentation and your discussion ties in quite perfectly with Theo's. And you have talked about the interaction between traditional authority and the statutory authority in terms of the tenure systems in Mongo. I wonder if, I know your focus is Mongo, I wonder if this applies to the rest of Western Province. Because obviously Kusio's presentation is much broader, looks at a more provincial level as opposed to just the district. So it would be important just to try to unpack and understand if there are differences across Western Province, or do we see a more general application of some of these standards in the province. And also, some of the conflicts that you talk about, housing standards, for example, you say that within state land and the traditional land as well, there's a lot of conflict around that. Blocked access to roads, I wonder what exactly this means, what it looks like on the ground. Is it a case of state authorities do not have access to certain parts of Mongo, as you have indicated? Inaccessible waterfronts as well. I think it would be very interesting to sort of reflect a bit more on that and just provide much more detail so that we understand exactly what the situation is. But we'll come back to that because I think we can move now to the third presentation, which comes from Ronald Daka. Ronald is the director of the Local Government Investment Support Program at Lloyds Financial Limited. He is the former town clerk of quite a number of districts in Zambia, former town clerk of Chipata, Solwezi, Kawe, and Mbala. He is also the former president of the Society of Local Authorities, and also the chairman or former chairman of the Valuation Surveyors Registration Board. And Ronald has successfully established land management systems in 4 municipalities. Today, Ronald is going to discuss institutional capacities and drivers of corruption in land administration in Zambia, which should be very interesting as well. Ronald, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Chilombo. Good afternoon, participants. I hope you can be able to get me, Chilombo.
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
I don't know whether I'm appearing on video.
You were a minute ago, not anymore. Maybe you can just turn on your video again. There you go. We can see you now.
Thank you. I want to just appreciate this opportunity to be able to make this presentation in assessing institutional capacities and drivers of corruption in land administration in Zambia. And I want to say that it's a subject that I think I really would love to share a few thoughts on the basis of, I think, some of the problems that we seem to see as, occurring over and over again. I think Zambia is one country that when you look at the governance index, I mean, in terms of issues to do with corruption, I think we are a country that over and over again, we are appearing as not doing very well in that area. I think we did hear yesterday, I think one of the presentations by Dr. Andrew Chilombo. I think he did indicate that even the 7th National Development Plan did observe that one of the challenges that Zambia faces today in terms of implementing the 7th National Development Plan is the issue of corruption. Now, if you look at the definition of corruption, or perhaps I'll put it that corrupt, when you look at the Anti-Corruption Act, it is simply talking about soliciting, accepting, obtaining, or giving, or promising, or offering any form of gratification by way of a bribe or other personal temptation or inducement. At the end of the day, this is for the personal benefit of the individual that is receiving that amount of bribe. Now, if you look at even issues of gratification, it simply means a corrupt payment. Now, when you see all these reports, especially done by Transparency International Zambia and indeed a number of other governance institutions, and they indicate that Zambia has a problem in terms of corruption, I think we as Zambians ought to be beginning to think in terms of how best can we deal with this problem of corruption. So in assessing institutional capacities and drivers of corruption, I think it's a very, very critical topic, and especially as it affects land administration. As you know, all development takes place on land. So I'm going to speak on this issue and perhaps highlight what institutional capacities exist at the moment, and then we zero in on the drivers of corruption in land administration. Next slide. Now, in general, all land in Zambia is vested in the president, and ordinarily is administered by the Commissioner of Lands, who is just a public officer appointed by the president for that purpose. The issues of what percentages constitute traditional land and what percentage constitutes state land, I think it's a matter of maybe further study. I think we did hear from some of the presentations yesterday that we may be talking of state land. Maybe by now it could have increased to as much as 40% plus. And traditional land maybe still is somewhere like 60%. But I think some old documentation you'll see, it largely talks about 10% state land, 90% traditional land. Now, land administration is guided by Land Circular number 1 of 1985. This provides for the procedure for land acquisition and the role of various institutions in the process. And typically there are 3 legal ways of acquiring land in Zambia. One, you get a direct offer from the commissioner, still legally one way. Other way is a recommendation that comes through the council and through traditional authorities. Can I have the next slide? I've highlighted here that a pathway to securing a land title, a legal land title that you can be able to present to a bank, you can be able to present to any institution and prove that you are the owner of the land, that there are, in terms of the 3 ways that I highlighted above, if you want to get land in state land, the procedure starts with a planning authority identifying the land. This may be a provincial planning authority or a municipal or city council planning authority. It will plan the land, or indeed any other town councils that have been given the status of a planning authority. They will identify the land, in other words, plan the land. And the next step involves the Office of the Surveyor General confirming the availability, and they will, when they confirm that that land is available, is not encroaching on any other piece of land, they will also proceed to number the land. In the 3rd stage means the district council or town council or indeed any other city or municipal council will recommend whichever applicants have been interviewed or given that opportunity, they will recommend them to the Commission of Lands to be given a final offer. Number 4, the land is surveyed by a licensed surveyor who has been approved by the Office of the Surveyor General. So if you are, a surveyor is among the list that has been, approved by Surveyor General, they will be allowed to be able to proceed and survey that particular parcel of land. And then, of course, the lease and title is issued by the Commission of Lands. Another pathway is that land under customary tenure, you will start the process with the chief or headman. Now, here I'm also recognizing that where there are planning agreements done between a traditional authority and a particular local authority, if you're implementing an integrated development plan, the process still starts with that particular area, headman or traditional authority, identifying the land and recommending to the council. And then secondly, the council will endorse the application. I'm emphasizing the council will endorse, or they'll look at the application. Ordinarily, they give a no objection and make a recommendation to the Commission of Lands. Thirdly, under this arrangement, the survey department again has to confirm the availability, and then they will make recommendations, and basically saying a no objection goes to the Commission of Lands. And then the land is surveyed by a licensed surveyor. This is extremely critical. And then the Commissioner of Lands, will be able to grant a lease and issue title. In informal settlements, this is provided for in the Urban and Regional Planning Act. Before that, there was the Town and Country Planning Act, where the planning authority again identifies the land, prepare a local plan, and based on that plan, in other ways, identify how far does this land in, and how big is the informal settlement. And then the district council identifies occupants on the land. Remember, these informal settlements started without any planning, but now the land has been occupied. So the council must be able to identify who are the people sitting on this particular land. And then the district council will arrange for the survey and request for numbering as per usual procedure. Then the council will proceed to subdivide the land and number the individual parcels. And then the district council will proceed to give a council occupancy license, or depending on what has been arranged, the council may proceed to give a council certificate of title, depending on the status. Next slide. Now, we are saying that there's a problem in terms of centralized control of land administration. And I think the slide that we see there is that things are controlled from the center. And this is an example of an area called Misisi in Lusaka. And Misisi is next to an area called Kamala, which is a planned area. In fact, Misisi compound is probably less than a kilometer from the central business district of Lusaka. But this is where land people simply went in and occupied. But the results is what you see there. And if you look at even the way the roads are set out, it's all like the map of Africa. And it's all mixed up, confusion and so forth. So in other words, planning authorities, cities and municipalities established under urban and regional planning control in the area like Misisi literally have no control on land which is located in an area like that, and also in land largely in the periphery of towns and cities. And of course, planning authorities, cities and municipalities don't have control on land under customary tenure. Now, expansion of unplanned informal settlements, if you were to see what has been happening, is that they are largely politically driven expansions. And like in the case of Misisi, this started, I think, way back in the 50s. And really it's a mass of confusion, but people moved in, and Misisi is what it is today. In terms of how is this land given, it's a procedure which we cannot, there is no clear procedure in terms of the provisions of the law. We can go to the next slide. Now, what are the major drivers of corruption in terms of the Ministry of Lands and Traditional Authorities? So in terms of the Ministry of Lands, number one, we are saying it's a centralized system with inadequate staff, and then also lacking appropriate technology. It's the best environment created for officers. Some officers, not all officers, but some officers to abuse their authority. If you notice, the Ministry of Lands headquarters, my research tells me that Survey Department probably has much more staff, 146. You go to the Lands Department, it's just 51 members of staff. Now, these are people who must cater for the whole country. Anyone who goes to the Ministry of Lands today, you will notice that in terms of queues, it's the order of the day. I remember that Ministry of Lands used to have a service charter, which said that normally within 2 weeks, you must get your title. It is not feasible, even talking from personal experience. Now, in the provinces, Ministry of Lands, you find on average, they have only 4 technical staff. Is that possible that, you know, these few staff can be able to tackle a whole province? And also, Ministry of Lands is also too remote to appreciate the realities in the 116 districts. There is also no system of accountability to key local stakeholders who are on the ground. Traditional authorities. The major issue is that if you look at traditional authorities, it depends on where you are in Zambia. If you look at even from the earlier presentation by my colleague, Kosio, you will notice that like in the Barose kingdom, perhaps there is a more organized system, but not all traditional authorities may be organized in the manner that the Barose are organized. So do traditional authorities really have the type of personnel with requisite technical capacity to administer land? And the answer, you may find that it is a no. Then there's also no clear system established by government to regulate operations in land under customary tenure. In other words, depending on which side of the country you are in, but yet all these will feed into converting of customary land into state land. Then also unilateral decisions are more the norm than the exception and define, you know, the way most traditional authorities, you know, are able to administer land in Zambia. There is also no system established for providing checks and balances. In other words, who will provide, you know, oversight in terms of how traditional authorities are able to give out land? This is more the reason, I think, from the presentations we received yesterday. You know, you'll find that as at now, maybe we are not very clear. Is it 40% of the land now which is state land? Or is it even 50%, which now has, I mean, state land has expanded to 50%? So those are issues that I think require that we have to begin to look at, can we be able to change and improve as a country? Next slide. Then also, what drives corruption in local authorities? I must say that personal experience, and I think when you just get into as many councils, you will notice that it's similar problems that you may see at the center. I mean, I'm referring to like at Ministry of Lands headquarters, but largely in local authorities, poorly designed systems of land administration in most councils. You may find that departments of planning and legal departments, they may not fully understand what are supposed to be their individual mandates as departments in terms of land administration. It's not strange to find the Department of Planning also deals with land, offering of land, while there's a legal department. You'll find there is no properly established registry unit in the council. Even when a bank wants to give out a loan, and you find that there is no proper registry, how do you go about, you know, to register, you know, the different interests in land? Or indeed, if you want to change ownership on a particular property. So inefficiency comes in. Then also the system of legalization of plots is not well established. Then I want also to state that in local authorities, what also drives corruption is exclusion of persons who are not councillors in planning committees of councils, because this hampers transparency. Previously, there was an opportunity for people who were not councillors that they could participate in the planning committees of councils, but it's no longer the case. One just has to look at the Local Government Act of 2019. There are also inadequate staff in the majority of councils, despite the amount of work involved. Land administration is not an easy task. There's a lot of work involved, but do the councils have the right complement of survey staff? I'm speaking about licensed survey staff. Do councils have adequate numbers of planners, or indeed those in the registry, those who have studied law? There are also inadequate technical skills and capacity among council staff, because most of the staff, the Local Government Service Commission may have employed a good number of staff, but a good number of these staff require more training. That is appropriate for the purpose of land administration. Then also lack of appropriate equipment and technology used in land and related processes. Do councils have the latest equipment that can help? So all these tend to work towards encouraging or driving corruption in local authorities. Next slide.
All right, you have a minute to just finish off, Ronald.
So here are my recommendations. I'm saying that Zambia must largely maintain the current system of title, but make some changes to improve efficiency. There is need to restructure the land administration in Zambia and use the best technologies for land administrations. And here I'm referring to both state actors, central government, as well as local government, as well as traditional authorities. Need to provide for deployment of adequate numbers of technical staff in all the provinces and districts. Then standardize the system used by traditional authorities in land administration. The land administration should be devolved to provinces and districts. It's already provided for in the 2016 Constitution when it talks about a land commission. The primary function of the Minister of Lands should be regulatory. In other words, Commission of Lands must largely be involved in coordinating land administration, ensuring compliance with policies and regulations. Next slide. Thank you for listening. Good afternoon.
Thank you so much, Ronald. Another very interesting presentation, the incapacities and drivers of corruption. And some of the things, or one of the things that you attribute corruption to is inadequate institutions, insufficient systems, and you also talk about unskilled or underskilled staff at the Ministry of Lands and all these other departments that are involved in land administration. There's been this ongoing debate around the decentralization of the Ministry of Lands. I wonder if you have thoughts around what this decentralized structure would look like, and also if there would be challenges to achieving this decentralization that we've been talking about for quite a number of years. We have quite a number of questions that have come through. We'll get to that once we get to the Q&A after the last presentation. And just to remind everyone, if you have a question, let us know who that question is addressed to and type it in the Q&A box, and we'll get to that in a couple of minutes. And now moving on to our last presentation today from Dr. Rose Fumka Makano, who is a public policy specialist and has a passion for socially inclusive development. She's an ardent advocate for gender equality and pro-poor strategies and policies. She holds a PhD in political science and MA in public policy administration from the University of Missouri in St. Louis, USA, and a BSc in agroforestry from the University of Wales in the UK. She's currently at the Copperbelt University, the Lusaka campus, where she's a program coordinator under the Daga Mashod Institute for Peace and Conflict Studies. She has over 20 years experience working on national and international policies that deal with natural resources and environmental management. And her presentation today takes a different aspect of what we've listened to. It hones in on women's land rights in Zambia, and she tries to explore how that can promote economic empowerment for women in Zambia across provinces. So Rose, please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, Chilombo, and thank you to the Tetra Tech Zambia team for organizing this conference, which has given us a platform to share ideas and our experiences, as well as learn from each other. And I'm grateful for all the participants. I say welcome, good morning, where there is a morning, and good afternoon, like where I am. My presentation, as has been already introduced, I'm looking at women land rights in Zambia as a process for economic empowerment. Actually, I must apologize for the title, because this was the initial intention. But as I explored to look for data, I did not find any data on land ownership. And what I ended up having is what we have seen or will soon see in my slides as basically property ownership. But I'm glad with that data because it also tells a story in the sense that my motivation was to try and link the women empowerment in how they own land as property. Because we all know that land is undoubtedly the most important resource any person can have. Whatever we do it on the land. And so without ownership of the land, you are more or less not secure. In this case, there is no economic empowerment. Next slide, please. Chilombo.
Harold,
Thank you. Thank you. I start from looking at the demographic data, and this is important to understand where we are in terms of how many people and how are we segmented in terms of male and female. And I also just want to remind ourselves on the land tenure system, which has already been taken care of by our previous presenters, and I'm grateful for that. Definitely, the statistics are still fluid, but for sure, they have moved from 10% being in state land, because as you might know, the state continues to get land through the councils. Actually, they go to the traditional leaders to ask for expansion of their jurisdictions. And so that land continues to expand while the customary land is getting smaller. From the statistics I got, and I know that this could still also be different. You are looking at 34% in state land and 66% in customary land. I show the statistics of the estimates on how our population has moved. Unfortunately for 2020, we do not have the rural versus urban situation, but I'm sure if we do not have what I'm hearing, and this is a rumor that maybe they may not undertake the 2020 census, we may have to wait a little longer for those stats to come through. I also want us to quote the figures that I picked for the 2018 in terms of household headship for male and female. And they are also shown in urban and rural. This picture is very important for us. And I've deliberately not covered or want to spend time on the methodology, which was basically a desk review. All this data we are looking at, or we shall look at, are coming from policy documents from the Republic of Zambia. Ministry of Lands, Central Statistics Office, and some scholars that have looked at these issues. And I've also not wanted to spend more time on the theory guiding this, but essentially it's a policy analysis approach where I'm trying to pitch into the property ownership as a human security item. And I look at the question of where are we now? When we look at the different policy prescriptions, starting with, for instance, the SADC protocol on gender equality, you go into our own Vision 2020, you look at the Gender Equity and Equality Act number 22 of 2015, you go into our current 7th National Development Plan, and even when you go backwards to the African Charter on Human Rights and People's Rights, or even the UN Charter on Human Rights, and including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all these policy documents speak to the reason why we ought to take care of both genders in an equal manner. And that is where my interest was to see how far are we in empowering the women in vis-a-vis on land ownership. But as I've said, we are now looking at property ownership because that's the data that we have. Next slide, please. In terms of land administration in Zambia, we have a lot of agencies that interact in the land administration. Some are service providers and some are clients that access that land. And I'm grateful for the first day presentation because this part of information was shared particularly by the Director Forestry, colleagues from the Wildlife Department, including His Royal Highness from Wakula. So I'm not going to spend much time on that. It's just to highlight who is part of that land administration. For instance, when we're looking at Ministry of Justice, it is providing the services on the legal side of how land is administered. And then you have other agencies. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Hopefully it changed. I think there's a little bit of a lag. It should be title deeds issued. Is that right?
Right, thank you. And so as I was saying, there wasn't data that could speak to the land alone. When I went to access data to find out who has title to land, that's where I found the hitch that actually the data held in the Ministry of Lands does not separate the titles according to category of this is for a building, this is for the land as plain land. And so I settled with what I found. And I started my exploration from 1964, when Zambia became an independent state. And this is very important because we want to see at that point how much title, or if it was basically on land, how much land was held under title. And the picture shows you how that has been progressing. From 1964 to 1999, the data is not segmented into gender. It is just lumped together. And therefore, that's the first graph we are looking at. And it's put into the 5-year intervals. The second slide illustrates how these titles are held by province and by gender. You notice that Lusaka takes the highest chunk of the title deeds held in Zambia, followed by Copperbelt. And when you follow the trend, Central, you're basically looking at a train that is running along the line of rail. And therefore the question is this where people are having more information on why it is important to have title, or is it other reasons? Is it matters to do with cost that the rural provinces people cannot afford? Or is it the bureaucracy? Is it the other factors which other presenters have talked about? And this, because my study did not look at this, I'm letting them to speculation and hoping one day that area can be visited. Next slide, please. And so when we start from 2000 or 2000, when the data is being demarcated into gender, and I wanted to create this starting point because it is very important for us. You notice that in 2000, there was only 2.03% of women who held title, compared to men who had 8.62, and the rest, accounting for 87.7%, belongs to what is classified in the system as no gender. No gender actually refers to corporations. And this confirms what Andrew Chilombo talked about, that there's a lot, and other presenters, there's a lot of, when we look at land itself, more corporations are applying for land for development, and that could feed into that figure. The next graph, it now shows us in aggregate from 2000 to 2019, the title held by gender, and you can see again, the female component is very low. And we need to start being concerned, because when we go to the statistics I showed you earlier, the women are more in number than the men. But when it comes to property ownership, they are owning the least of that chunk of property, which should spur their well-being. And I take this as an interesting revelation because, one, we do not know whether these titles are at state land or whether these titles also include customary areas. And that's again another area for study. But it's an interesting in the sense that if the larger population is owning less, we need to be concerned. When we talk about women empowerment, these are some of the questions we need to start asking. Why are they owning less when they are larger in number? Next slide, please. The story of the title deeds doesn't only end at the title deeds themselves. There is a process, and I'm grateful again for the other presenters who showed us how the land administration and getting title to land, particularly just the recent presenter was showing us how you can access land from the chiefs, access lands through the councils, access lands from state land, the Ministry of Lands. Now, that process has what they call getting an offer letter. And I was interested to know that apart from the titles, how much is there for those whose applications have been approved? And my hope was maybe the female component might score larger, assuming that they are having difficulty to find money to pay so that their offer letters could be processed and finalized into title deeds. But the picture we find again, it's actually skewed back to the non-gender, accounting for the larger portion, and the female accounting for just the 13%.
Right,
And
Rose,
when you
just
see
a
the
minute.
trend, when you see that,
So you have just a minute to wind up.
thank you. When you see the trend, that trend gives us that there is a rise in accessing title to property. Next slide, please. Thank you. And in my conclusion, I show that land ownership is actually a livelihood security. The picture you see here, this is a group of women in Rufonsa who have empowered themselves with support from some partners, Women for Change, where I serve as board chairperson, and also Solar Coast, a Zimbabwean-based company, but now they have offices in Zambia. These women are not farm workers. They are actually their own employers. They grow butternuts. What they did was Solar Quest came in and gave them supplies, the infrastructure of solar panels, the irrigation pipes that you can see, and the water tanks in the background. And they've been harvesting butternuts. They have harvested their first crop was in February, where they harvested 10 tons of butternuts, and they will be soon harvesting the second crop this month, and the third crop possibly coming this December. So when we empower women, we shall have less poverty in our communities. In conclusion, in terms of what did this study find, clearly what we see is that property ownership in Zambia is largely skewed towards corporations. And that's an area we need to start investigating why. And women own the smallest percentage. And in this case, they are still a long way to be empowered, but we have a chance to do something about touching that area of how can we empower these women and make them economically and socially sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rose. You present some very interesting statistics around women's ownership of land and also ownership and holding of title deeds. I think a very important discussion to have. One of the things that you mentioned that you present in your statistics is Western Province. I think I noticed that it has one of the lowest numbers of title deeds held by women, but also just in general compared to other provinces. I wonder if the traditional structure that were presented earlier by Kusio and Barnabas have any bearing on this? I think we can have a conversation around that, and we'll just move on to the Q&A to discuss some of these issues. And to start us off, I think I will go to Kusio and Barnabas, starting with Kusio, a number of questions here that Barnabas can also pick up on. Is there some sort of information sharing mechanism between BRE and the Ministry of Lands? Barnabas mentioned that there is mutual respect between the two institutions, but is there information sharing, especially around spatial data? Yes, so in addition to that, you can also, especially Kusio, maybe talk about, is there a digitization of data in BRE in terms of course, spatial data, cadasters, and all of that? So I'll start with Kusio. So Kusio or Barnabas, you can pick this up. Is there any sort of information sharing mechanism between BRE and the Ministry of Lands?
Thank you, Chilombo. From what you've done, the information sharing happens at the point where the council has approved or has recommended to Ministry of Lands. In the case where there is, say, conversion of land tenure from customary to statutory tenure, the council is involved in that process, therefore can take stock of what has been converted, and at that point it does have statistics. Otherwise, know that whether there is that communication or information sharing in terms of cadasters and so on, there isn't much as far as I know.
Okay, thanks a lot, Barnabas. Kusio, are you there? Could you just make a comment on that?
I think the first example, there is some discussions. For example, there's a place called New Mungu. The council, the Mungu Council approached the Barroso Royal Establishment and they gave them land. So I think the discussions are there based on the needs basis.
Okay, great. And so, so you do say that there is some sort of information sharing mechanism between based on the needs. Okay, yes. And with BRE, do they have a digitized land administration system?
I beg your pardon?
Is there any sort of, what is the land administration structure like? How, is there an issuance of land holding certificates, for example? How is this recorded?
Okay, there's what we call land ownership certificate, which is issued by the Barroso Royal Establishment.
Could you just maybe take us just briefly through the process of issuing this landholding certificate?
Okay, the first thing is you look at the piece of land which you want. Then you will find out who actually manages it on behalf of the Litunga. Once you have agreed with that particular person, then they'll take you to the Kuta. They'll come and look at it to ensure that nobody can claim that land, that it belongs to them. Once they are assured of that, they'll give you that land. And then the process is, once you've been given, you give the royal salute, and then the next thing, they'll give you the land ownership certificate.
Okay, great. And also, there's a question around land holding by women within Barroso land. Are women issued these certificates or documents in their names?
The traditional system does not discriminate against women. No, it doesn't. At least for Barroso land. For example, my wife, her mother was given land by her grandmother, and that land is now belongs to my wife, and my wife might give it to one of our daughters. So the land itself, the issuing of land, is based on the family, and it does not discriminate against women. The only problem comes, like if she gets married, now the brothers or the uncles might grab it, not that they're actually giving it to them, no.
Okay, all right. I think that's very clear that there is no discrimination within the traditional system on women holding land. I just want to quickly move to Ronald, and I want him to just answer this question that we have around the acquisition of land and getting title, which requires environmental and social impact assessment, application for water rights and all of that. So depending on the land size and what it will eventually be used for. So here the sentiment is that this is often not done, either because it is not known, the processes are not clear, either by local authorities, traditional, or the locals themselves, traditional sellers and buyers, or is this something that is deliberately neglected? Could there be some sort of collaboration and sharing between the various departments on some of these very important reports that are required before someone starts a project in terms of the environmental and social impact assessments? Ronald.
Thank you. Thank you, Musa. I want to say that the key as provided for in the Urban and Regional Planning Act lies in the preparation of integrated development plans or the local area plans before any development can take place. Now, there is a problem right now where in terms of when traditional authorities are giving out land, there is ordinarily disregard to what bigger plans, government has of a particular area. In other words, a person or an investor comes in and wants to acquire a particular piece of land, they go straight into the community, will meet the headman involved or a headman for that particular area. They commence discussions, and all these other authorities are not included at that particular point. When the discussions are concluded, then whatever is prepared, they will consult the Ministry of Agriculture to prepare a plan and a sketch plan, and that sketch plan, together with a recommendation from the chief of that particular area, is what goes in the council. Now, at that particular stage, if say the land that is applied for, because I mean everybody at that within the chiefdoms, they will understand that you cannot apply for more than 250 hectares of land and pass it through the council. But by the time that application is coming to the council, it's more or less concluded, and the role of councils ordinarily is to endorse, as opposed to where the council should have been going into a detailed analysis and look at all the other factors, environmental factors, and consultation, of all the other stakeholders. So this is where the problem is at the moment, and that is not normally done, and this is what has caused, I think, a number of these problems, including where we are not sure whether is it 60% of land which is still under customary, or is it 90%. We don't even have that updated information. But I believe that through the current National Land Titling Program, if this program would be redesigned in a way that we build the capacities of the other major players. I'm looking at the other major players, like the local council, as well as the traditional authorities, build their capacity. There would be that aspect of coordination. Remember, the Constitution of Zambia now provides for decentralization through devolution. In other words, even other departments that deal with environment, other departments that deal with agriculture, water, and so forth, you find that they become part of the council decision-making process. Thank you.
Yes, actually, yeah, a very important point that you raised there. around the land audit, because throughout this presentation, we keep seeing very varying statistics around how much land is state land and how much is customary land. But I wonder, Ronald, again, if you could talk about the Urban and Regional Planning Act. Has it in any way improved planning and land administration since 2015?
Thank you, Chilombo. The Urban and Regional Planning Act, the way it's designed, is a very good instrument. It's a very good law that, if implemented properly, it will really help improve, our environments. But now the problem is that I think regulations to do with the urban and regional planning were just being worked on. Incidentally, I think at the time I was leaving government, I may not be updated as to whether they've been finalized, but the issue of regulations, perhaps other people will comment, if once implemented and then we begin to work on the basis of the Urban and Regional Planning Act, that will also help in curing a lot of these problems. Because then we'll be talking of any development that you want to take place. There must be collaboration. If you want to get traditional land, begin by talking to the traditional authorities. And even the traditional authorities equally must be aware that you cannot give out any land without talking to the planning authority that pertains to that area.
All right. Okay, great. Yeah, very, very interesting. I think it would be interesting to see where this takes us in terms of the implementation of some of the provisions of the Urban and Regional Planning Act around just streamlining and ensuring that the land administration process, land allocation process is a bit more transparent and actually does do what it says it will do in terms of providing equal access to land for women and all other groups in society. I have a question for Rose here around the draft land policy. We have a draft, we may have a policy, we may not have a policy in the next couple of months, maybe years, but the draft land policy does address equal access to land for men and women in both state and customary land. So it talks about the implementation of 50% land ownership for women. So what tools can we use or can be adopted to ensure that this is achieved, that this is not, a policy that sits in the draft or sits in the implemented or approved land policy, but is something that is actually implemented on the ground?
Thank you, Chilombo. That's a $100 plus question. It's one thing to write things. We all know about that. And it's another to implement them. The implementation process, as some presenters have highlighted, are more effective when they start from the ground, the bottom-up approach, rather than what tends to be the adopted or acknowledged process of after the law has been put in place, then government stipulates what needs to be done. I think the process needs to get back to the people. What is it that they want to see on their land? Some of the papers did point to the fact that there are complaints from subjects over their chiefs in how that land is being administered. Forget about the papers, the policy itself. Just first we get back to the chiefdoms, where we are not looking at any policy, but we are looking at how the people feel in that particular location. Here is a community member. They walk into the chief's palace. They want a piece of land of 20 hectares. The chief doesn't see the potential and capability in that person. And therefore the chief says, I cannot give you so much land, it's too big. I can only give you 1 hectare, probably maximum 2 hectares. This subject goes disgruntled but grateful for the 2 hectares. There comes another person, a non-gender, comes with a request for 40,000 hectares of land. They have no proof they have been in the agri sector for any of what they are showing that they will do. But the chief is happy to release that amount of land to this non-gender entity. And I raised this question yesterday on what is the maximum, without digressing from the question, allowable for land allocation. But in this case, I'm trying to point out the aspect of inequality. Now, when we come to how shall it be done, the people are the best to advise. Let's get to the people and ask them, because what is happening when we perpetuate the inequality and iniquity in land allocation, we are actually sowing seeds of dissent. And it's those seeds that will bring about what we do not want to see, that it erodes coexistence, because one portion of society feels disadvantaged, especially when they feel disadvantaged in their own country. That is where I can point that the way we can take this is to have the communities be part and parcel of promulgating how that land administration ought to be managed. I think in places where that has been tried to or show signs of that accommodation, and I'll point to Western Province, Barotseland. It's a system that has worked for a long time. That is a system which actually, when you look at their governance systems, and I've done a study prior, looking at the connection between traditional systems and the national statutes. When you look at the national statutes, actually the national statutes on land administration, natural resources management in Zambia, they mimic what used to take place in the traditional setup. And Barros' traditional setup is one of those excellent examples, where they even have ministers. I know Mr. Kusio did not mention, or maybe I missed those portions of the minister for this particular sector, forestry, wildlife, and of course he talked about how the land is apportioned to the different owners. But in the Barros land system, you have even a higher level of people that manage those resources. Now, if we have to get to that kind of level, we probably will be able to get to the question you are asking, where people feel comfortable that this is how they would like to manage their land, and not being dictated to of how their land ought to be managed. And those are the things, when we look across most of the chiefdoms, we are having those chiefdom wrangles between the chiefs and the subjects, who are now saying, wait a minute, it is our land, you preside over it. It's not your land alone as the chief.
Right, yes, you present some very interesting points for discussion there. And I just want to stay with that thought on Western Province of Barotseland. Going back to the statistics that you presented, why do you think Barotseland has the lowest number of titles issued to women?
Part of the history, and I stand to be corrected by Mr. Kusio, from what I found in my study I referred to, I think that should have been 2012, I undertook it under the Center for Forest Research, International Center for Forest Research, CIFOR. The Barros Royal Establishment has very strict ways of how the land is given. That's number one. Number two, like in any other traditional setup, the women are subordinated to the men. And that's one of the questions one of the people have asked you. Don't you think more women, there are more men as household heads than women, and it is very true. So that could be, I'm not saying that is what it is, but that could be one of the reasons that their system, first of all, is a system that does not allow title to be given on the land, but appreciates it like in some of the other chiefdoms that you can own the land in perpetuity without having title, because I'm not going to chase you from this chiefdom. And that's the principle of customary land. It's property ownership through inheritance in perpetuity. And by the way, it gives security to a common Zambia, because the moment the land moves from customary without title to a land with title, it demands that landowner to start paying land rates to government. The question is, how many of our people are able to afford to do that? Therefore, the system as it is offers a security inbuilt in it. So that could be one of the reasons.
All right, okay. Okay, thanks a lot.
On the statistics, perhaps they were looking at state-owned land, not traditional land. I don't know if the research touched on traditional land or it just touched on people who've got title deeds.
The land did not segment where this title is held. That's what I was clarifying. It just lumps whether you have title in council land, as in council jurisdiction, or you have title in customary land, or you have title on state land. The Ministry of Lands have not segmented data in those categories. And it's one area we can start engaging them, that they can start doing that, so that we know where is these titles held. Are they in customary? Are they in state land? Are they in council land? And also, we need to engage them to start showing where this title relates to. Is it on a building, as in a residential area? Is it a factory building? Is it just mere farmland? They can simply put codes. For instance, mere farmland can be one, a factory 2, residential as in dwelling place 3, and stuff like that. So when you are wanting to access that data, they'll just plug in and then you can have it segmented that way. That's an admin issue that can easily be.
Pointing again.
I'd like to address the question that was posted, which I didn't address.
Okay, in just under a minute.
Yes, I do agree that yes, men, we have more men as household heads. But when you look at the statistics on the slide which was shown for the total title deeds held, when you calculate the 12,429 over the total number, you end up with 8.5% of title held by women. Now compare that to 28% of women households in urban and 25.8% households in rural areas. It's still telling a story that women are not holding more title than men.
Okay, all right. I will start with closing reflections now. I want to go to Kusio and just you talked about state land and customary land within Barotse land. There's a question around the emergence of a hybrid tenure system. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, and if you are, could you please just address that? A hybrid tenure system that is neither state nor is it customary, and what implications it has in terms of land administration in Barotse land, particularly in Mongo district.
It's because I think, like what Rose mentioned, you are talking land owned by a family, not an individual. So that individual or the head of that family has no right to be able to change it in any way. So it belongs to the family. Then hybrid has its own problems, because we are talking about mixing two different systems, which were designed differently for different purposes.
Okay, so any closing reflections around ensuring that development planning in Barotse land is done adequately with the involvement of both state authorities and BRE authorities? Or is there a way of ensuring that BRE manages its land administration processes, or do you think it will manage its land administration processes or away from the Ministry of Lands or the state?
And to me, my major concern is whoever is the developers or the investors, they have to recognize that the person or the individual who owns land, that is their contribution to any particular development. And that should be taken that they should be able to benefit, because you are going to gain on their land. They should also have something else. So whoever has got land, to me, has a resource that can propel them into development, and that ownership should be recognized, not necessarily that because we have got the title.
Right, okay. Barnabas, if you could just come in and close with your thoughts on, is there a way of integrating the BRE system into, if you will, the formal system or the legal system, and also talk about how to resolve the conflicts that you identified. You talked about roads being blocked, no access to river fronts as well. So what do you think are the solutions to some of these conflicts?
Thank you, Chilombo. To start, let me address different housing standards. As you may know, all local authorities demand that planning permission must be issued for anyone who wants to build on state land. However, when you find a situation where the issuing authority for that piece of land is different, they also have their own standards for which they allow someone to build. In this case, a lot of people that build based on who are given permission by the BRE do not follow the standard set by the local authority, because while the BRE tells them to build according to the existing land use, it is not followed strictly. And since the issuing authority of that land is the independent of that land in terms of the permission should be issued by the same authority. Now, talking about the blocked accesses, the site found that some of the roads had been closed off by the people who had been given land there, and they had the ownership documents. So in that case, the local authority must engage the BRE and then come up with and come up with a solution on how to open up those routes. For example, and in other cases, the roads themselves have been narrowed to the point where service trucks can't access those areas, which I think is a danger, because fire trucks cannot access those areas, ambulances can't go there, and even waste trucks can't access those areas. My final thoughts on the solution to these conflicts is engagement, constant engagement, meaningful and deep, high-level engagement. The Urban and Regional Planning Act provides for this engagement, and it's a good piece of legislation. I saw that Moses and SEPA had similar questions in view of URP. Don't you see an opportunity? Yes, the opportunity is there, and the Urban and Regional Planning Act provides for planning agreements. Also, the fact that we have the Urban and Regional Planning Act proves that the nation has moved now to participatory planning, and this is a very important move. That this is a very, very important change that has happened in the planning system. So my final thoughts really are that the power to change everything around us, to change the way we administer land, to change the way we want to see development lies in our hands, and we can have conversations over these matters. And the very fact that we have BRE on the platform and other Royal Highnesses is proof that we all want this change. So it is a good thing, and we must carry on with the conversations and act upon them. Thank you.
Thanks, Barnabas. Now, quickly moving on to Ronald. Closing remarks, especially around the decentralization of the Ministry of Land. What would this structure look like? What do we want to see from this decentralization? And also, one of the things that you mentioned was that there's no clear system that has been established by the government to regulate operations in land under customary tenure. And I just want you to reflect on that and talk about why you think in your presentation the government should establish systems for the administration of land in customary areas, and whether we should be moving towards strengthening existing customary systems in land administration.
Thank you, Chilombo. My concluding remarks on the issue of how government can decentralize, I think I will pick it up that the current constitution of Zambia has talked about the establishment of a lands commission. Now, if we are talking about establishing a lands commission, that will again be another central government oriented institution, but operating at district level. We will not be curing the problem. We are better off having a system that empowers local authorities through building the capacity of local authorities, provide oversight systems within those local authorities. So let me put it, that can oversee what is happening in the local authorities, who elected leaders at that particular level to be able to oversee what the technocrats are doing. And that way, if you establish a commission, the best example I can give, currently Electoral Commission of Zambia has got electoral officers at district level. And yet, if you see the structure, is that Electoral Commission of Zambia is in Lusaka. But who are the district electoral officers? Is town clerks and council secretaries. Very similarly, even in terms of land, if we are able to decentralize that, we have a system where certain officers can be appointed at that level, it will make a whole lot of difference. And I'm speaking about like the Urban and Regional Planning Act, particularly Section 28, if I'm not mistaken, is talking about district registrar of lands and deeds. So why can't we just improve the system that already exists within the provision of the Constitution and then strengthen, train, and then central government should provide the oversight of whatever is happening and regulate. And it will be easier for central government rather than seeing those queues that are Ministry of Lands headquarters.
Right. Okay, thanks a lot, Ronald. I'll move to Rose for her final reflections. What are the solutions? Is there room for registration of joint land ownership, for example? Is that a possibility? What implications would it have? For example, where we encourage married couples to own land together and provide tax incentives, or in terms of the paying of rent and ground rent as well. Is this something we should be exploring? What is the way forward for ensuring that women's land rights are protected?
Certainly, thank you, Chilombo. Certainly, there is room for that, and it would provide that security that the women need, especially if there is the unfortunate situation of the male spouse dying before the female does. Because according to the laws of Zambia, you are protected by what is enshrined in the interstate law. And that means if, for example, the woman is not on the title deed, they are at the mercy of what their spouse has written in their will. But if they call on the property, then the woman is protected, becomes the next owner of that property. There is also an issue that I could possibly, if with your permission, Chilombo, address relating to conversion of land, meaning from customary land into state land. Yes, when you do that, that land becomes a state land in terms of administration, although it will be sitting in the traditional land. And that is an area for some of us getting interested in. As more land is converted from customary land, are we looking at the question of the death of the chiefdoms in Zambia? But that's a question for another time. But the short answer is when land is converted, it goes into state land, although it might be sitting in traditional land. In other words, we shall have pockets of state land sitting in traditional land. There is no data for now. Like as I keep saying, it has not been segmented in any way possible that you can tell that this is land that has been converted from either council land or traditional land. All you have is just a title deed held at Ministry of Lands. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Rose, and thank you so much to all our presenters today. Thank you to all the attendees for joining us. This has been a very interesting discussion, and one thing that has emerged is that we need better data in terms of land holding, certificates, land titles as well, both on state land and customary land as well. The discussions today have also highlighted some inefficiencies in the administration of land in both tenure systems, but also opportunities for more collaboration between the various institutional actors in the administration of land, because all of these inefficiencies are obviously ripe for corruption, as we have heard, and the discrimination in the allocation of land. Some policy prescriptions, obviously, we've heard today from our presenters, such as improving technology and human resource skills among staff that are involved in land administration. So thank you so much for joining us. We will continue with these discussions, especially around land documentation, on customary land and state land. I realize this is something that a lot of people are interested in. A lot of questions have come through, a lot of comments in the chat box and in the Q&A as well. So we'll continue with this discussion next Wednesday and Thursday. We're focusing on land documentation on both customary and state land. So we'll have, over the next 3 weeks, more discussions, 6 sessions to go. We're also talking about integrated natural resource management in week 3 and integrated development planning as our last session. Remember, every Wednesday and Thursday starting at 13 hours. So next week, please join us for a deep dive into discussions on customary and state land documentation. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chilombo.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.